The movie opens, and we're introduced to a scientist and his daughter Wei. Both of them have a peculiar mark on their faces, which detracts from their appearance. This scientist had set up a lab in his house and had been experimenting for quite a while. At this moment, Wei is drawing a picture of a flower known as a crop flower. Her dad explains that this flower possesses significant healing properties, and it only grows sporadically, deep in the jungle. The scientist mentions he has used this flower in his experiments many times. After extensive work, the scientist finally succeeds in creating a serum that could conceal the mark on his face. He had developed a serum capable of fusing the tissues of two different sources. He then cuts a piece of skin, applies a chemical to it, and adheres it to his face. As soon as it's applied to his face, the skin patch begins to grow. Its tissues start regenerating, and the skin slowly expands. It also starts covering his mouth, forming wounds as it grows. Witnessing this, he becomes terrified. This wasn't what he intended. He only wanted to eliminate the mark on his face. But this skin patch ended up covering his entire mouth. Terrified, the scientist cut at the area of his lips. He sliced through the new skin. But despite his efforts, the skin reconnected. The skin was spreading over his eyes and nose. Again and again, it spread over his lips and eyes, and he kept cutting at his lips. Seeing all this, Wei became incredibly scared. Though she wasn't usually afraid of her dad, in a shocking turn, she grabbed a knife, stabbed him, and killed him. This traumatic event shatters her. She had killed her dad, and now she was all alone. Time passes, and she continues her studies. Like her father, she excelled in her studies. Because of this, she earned a scholarship to a major university in the US. So, she left her hometown and moved to the US. In the US, she was set to live with her aunt. Her aunt's daughter was named Angie, and Angie wasn't thrilled about Wei coming to live with them, because it meant she'd have to share her room. Regardless, Wei goes to her room and sets up a small shrine. In it, she places her dad's picture. It's clear she revered her dad, almost like a god, and she essentially worshipped him. A little later, we see her with some of her dad's notes and belongings, and we realize she's continuing the very experiment that led to her father's death. The next day was her first day at the university. On her way to the university, she encounters a man. He was homeless and often sat in that spot. His face was severely disfigured. Wei stared at him for a few moments. The man helped Wei by giving her directions to the university, after which, Wei continued on her way. Once in class, the professor proudly introduces Wei to everyone, because Wei had scored a perfect 100% on the entrance exam, and this was the first time that had happened in years. After class, Wei lingers in the science lab, and she attempts to take some supplies. As she's doing this, the professor spots her and asks, "What are you doing here?" Wei explains, "I need to conduct some experiments, for which I need to borrow some things from here." The professor tells her, "Taking supplies from here isn't allowed. However, if you become my lab assistant, then you'll have access to everything here." Wei tells the professor, "My dad was also a scientist, and I need to continue his research." She was holding his research diary at that moment, which the professor began to look through, and he was clearly very surprised by what he saw. After Wei left, he researched her father, and he discovered that Wei's father was indeed a genius scientist. But due to a lack of funding, he was never able to fully pursue any of his experiments. Meanwhile, we see that Wei's cousin Angie's two friends have come over to their house. They start snooping through Wei's belongings, and in the process, they find some blood-stained tools, strange and unsettling items related to experiments, and disturbing experiment photos. Seeing these things, all three of them are creeped out. Anyway, the next day arrives, and we see Angie still hanging out with her friends. Wei saw them and felt a longing to connect. Wei also wished she had friends like that. So, she approached them and tried to strike up a friendship, and she offered to treat them to lunch. Because of Wei's facial mark, the girls were hesitant and didn't really want to go with her, but they reluctantly agreed to go to the restaurant anyway. However, once they got there and saw Wei's unusual way of eating, they ditched Wei at the restaurant and took off. Wei packed up all the leftover food and went outside and gave it to the homeless man with the disfigured face. She also takes a moment to talk with the homeless man, because she was feeling particularly sad that day. She says to him, "This mark on my face makes me so ugly." So the homeless man replies, "That's not true. You're beautiful just the way you are." After talking with him, Wei felt a little better. Now she was heading home. On the way, she ran into her professor, who offered her a ride. He had drafted a proposal for her. He tells her, "I'll help you complete this research." For this, the professor needed Wei's permission, because it was her father's research. Wei happily agreed, because the professor was the first person to offer her help. Starting the next day, they began working on the experiment. Despite many days of hard work, their experiment wasn't successful. All their efforts seemed to be in vain. They weren't achieving the desired results. At this point, the professor becomes frustrated and decides to halt the experiment. While Wei was feeling sad about this, Angie's friend Alice showed up at the lab. She had also come to apply for the lab assistant position, and the professor accepted her application. Wei goes home with Angie, and on the way, Wei apologizes to Angie for her recent behavior, and they also make amends, becoming friends. During this time, Wei notices a poster Alice is holding. It featured a picture of the exact same flower her father used in his experiments. Seeing this, a realization dawning, Wei's mind raced. She learned that this flower was being featured in an upcoming exhibition. Reading this, she recalled her father's words, that this specific flower was crucial for their experiment. So she decided she had to get her hands on that flower. That night, she stealthily makes her way to the exhibition venue, a nearby farmhouse, and she steals the flower from the exhibition. She brings the stolen flower to the science lab, and there, she resumes her experiment. Unbeknownst to Wei, the professor and Alice were already hidden in the science lab. In her excitement, Wei didn't notice them. She extracted a substance from the flower and added it to her experimental compound. After that, she made an incision on her own leg. She then took a small patch of her skin, cut it into 2 pieces, and applied the serum to the severed edges. Amazingly, the serum fused the 2 pieces of skin back together. Then, she applied the serum to the spot on her leg where she had removed the skin. And then she applied the serum directly to the wound on her leg. As she watched, the skin at the wound site began to regenerate, turning healthy and smooth. She saw new skin forming rapidly. Essentially, the wound was healing itself before her eyes. The professor, astounded, watched all of this from his hiding spot. He immediately tells Alice to leave. Then he approaches Wei and asks, "What are you doing?" Wei excitedly explains to the professor how the flower's serum has made their experiment a success. Their experiment was finally working. As Wei was showing the healed skin on her leg to the professor, Alice, who was still lurking, grew jealous, suspecting something more was going on, and she snapped some compromising photos of Wei. After that, Alice confronted Wei, scolding her for her recklessness, and ushered her out of the lab. Wei was startled and scared by Alice's sudden appearance and angry demeanor. In her haste and fear, she accidentally left her father's notebook behind in the lab. The professor, noticing the abandoned notebook, was secretly pleased. By this time, Alice had already sent the photos to Wei's cousin, Angie. Meanwhile, the professor was busy trying to translate Wei's father's diary into English. Angie was furious when she saw the pictures, and in her rage, she went into Wei's part of the room and started breaking Wei's belongings. When Wei returned to the room and saw the mess, she was heartbroken. Then, suddenly, Angie attacked Wei from behind. Wei tried to defend herself, but Angie, in her fury, was trying to kill Wei. In the struggle, Wei grabbed a nearby pen and tried to push Angie away. The pen ended up stabbing Angie in the eye. It lodged in her eye, and Angie died right there. Although Wei hadn't intended to kill her, Angie was dead nonetheless. Panicked, Wei dragged Angie's body into the bathroom. What was she going to do with the body? Her mind raced with desperate and macabre thoughts. She began to cut away Angie's skin. After removing a section of skin from Angie's face, Wei applied her serum to her own face, and then she carefully grafted Angie's facial skin onto her own. The tissues of Wei's face and Angie's skin fused together, and Wei now looked exactly like Angie. Angie's mother had been out up to this point. As soon as she returned home, she saw Wei, thinking it was Angie, and embraced her, and she showered her with affection. Wei realized this was an effective disguise. From then on, she maintained her appearance as Angie. In the morning, she dressed in Angie's clothes, completing the transformation. She began to enjoy living Angie's life. When she went to the university, the first person she encountered was Angie's boyfriend. It was the first time a boy had ever been so close to her. Wei found the attention exhilarating. Now, with Angie's face, she fully immersed herself in enjoying Angie's life, and she realized how dull her own life as Wei had been. Angie had good friends, a boyfriend, and a loving mother. She even went on a date with Angie's boyfriend. As they were about to get intimate, suddenly, Angie's skin began to peel off Wei's face. Seeing this grotesque sight, the boyfriend was terrified. It was incredibly creepy. The boyfriend, horrified, scrambled away from Wei. As he backed away, he didn't realize there was a steep drop behind him. He stumbled and fell down the incline. He fell to his death. Terrified by what had happened, Wei rushed home. She frantically searched for her father's notebook, believing it held the secret to making the skin grafts permanent. But she couldn't find her father's notebook, because it was with the professor. However, she still had a small amount of serum left. She took it out and reapplied it to her skin, and her face once again took on Angie's appearance. Meanwhile, we see the professor. He is now searching for that specific flower. the one that could make the experiment successful. While searching for the flower, the professor receives a call from his translator, the one who was translating the notebook into English. The translator informs him that the experiment is extremely dangerous, and that pursuing it could have dire consequences. In no uncertain terms, the translator warned the professor to stop the experiment immediately, but the professor ignores his warning. Now, Wei goes to the university to retrieve her father's notebook. She can't find it anywhere in the lab, because the professor had given it to his translator. So, she calls the professor. The professor tells her, "Yes, I have the notebook, but you're not getting it back, because I'm going to publish this research under my own name." Hearing this, Wei became enraged, but there was nothing she could do at that moment, so she left quietly. As she was leaving the university, she spots Alice. She realizes that Alice is also romantically involved with the professor. Filled with anger towards the professor, Wei decided to take it out on Alice. Still disguised as Angie, she invited Alice over to the house, and Alice came. As soon as Alice arrived, Wei attacked her furiously. Alice, terrified, tried to escape and managed to make her way into the yard. But Wei caught up with her there, and, attacking her with a power drill, Wei killed her. After killing Alice, Wei removed her facial skin and applied it to her own face using the serum. Now she looked exactly like Alice. She styled her hair like Alice's, and dressed in Alice's clothes to complete the disguise. Looking at Alice's phone, she even copied her mannerisms and style, so that no one would suspect a thing. During all of this, a neighbor's dog, disturbed by the commotion, was barking incessantly, so the neighbors called the police. But when the police arrived, they saw Wei, disguised as Alice, wearing only a towel. She gave a plausible explanation, and they left without further questions. The next morning, when she goes to the university disguised as Alice, she feels a sense of power. Because Alice was a very popular student, everyone is happy to see Alice. Now, still as Alice, she goes to the professor's house. She was sure she'd find her dad's notebook there. The professor, unsuspecting, didn't realize it was Wei disguised as Alice. That's why the professor let her in. Wei, as Alice, searched the entire house for her dad's notebook but couldn't find it anywhere. She refocused on her plan. First, she needed to dispose of the bodies from the 2 murders she'd committed. She put Angie's and Alice's bodies in the swimming pool. Then she started going through Angie's and Alice's cell phones. There, she found the incriminating photos Alice had taken of her, Wei, and the professor, the ones Alice had intended to use to blackmail or expose them. Wei decided to use these photos against the professor, and she emailed them to the university authorities. When the authorities learned that the professor was exploiting female students for his personal gain, they had the police immediately arrest him. However, the professor had considerable influence. The very next day, he was out on bail, returned home, and immediately began working on the same experiment, Wei's father's experiment. Following the notebook's instructions step by step, he also successfully created the serum, and he tested it by trying to fuse 2 pieces of skin tissue. Amazingly, thanks to the chemical compound, the 2 skin tissues joined seamlessly. This meant his replication of the experiment was also successful. Upon this success, the professor was, strangely, not happy at all. Meanwhile, Wei, still disguised as Alice, arrives at his house. To clarify, it was Wei and Alice's guys who came. Seeing Alice, the professor becomes even more animated, and he invites her to sit in his living room, and he goes to get some refreshments for her. Now, Wei desperately needed to find her notebook. As soon as he leaves the room, she begins searching for it, and she finds it in a cabinet. She also finds the fresh batch of serum the professor had just made. She grabs both the notebook and the serum and flees. Her hurried departure makes the professor suspicious, and when he checked his cabinet, he saw that his newly made serum was gone. That night, Wei was at her home, reverted to her original appearance. Then, Alice comes to her, very upset, and tells her that both of her friends have disappeared under mysterious circumstances. She was incredibly distressed about this. Wei hugged her and offered comfort. Alice then asked for a glass of water. So when Alice opened the refrigerator to get it, what did she find inside? What horrors did she uncover? She saw that the dismembered body parts of her 2 missing friends were frozen inside the fridge. Seeing this, she was horrified and started screaming. Before anyone could hear her screams, or before she could escape and tell someone, Wei quickly subdued her, perhaps by covering her face with a plastic bag. She suffocated Alice and murdered her. This time, she didn't bother to hide the murder immediately. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was the professor. Finding the door unlocked, he let himself in. Wei was sitting inside, in a peculiar and unsettling manner. When she saw the professor, she began to laugh. Seeing her bizarre state, the professor felt uneasy. But when Wei then congratulated the professor on his successful replication of the experiment, The professor's mood brightened. But then Wei added angrily, "This wasn't your experiment. It was my dad's." The professor, ignoring Wei's outburst, moved towards the refrigerator, presumably to retrieve his serum, thinking Wei might have put it there. And as soon as he opened it, the sight of the dead bodies inside made him gasp in horror. The professor was in a state of shock and panic, difficult to manage. But Wei acted quickly and cleverly, and jabbing an injection into the professor's neck, she rendered him unconscious. Sometime later, when the professor regained consciousness, he discovered to his horror that Wei had flayed him, removing the skin from his entire body. Seeing his grotesque state, he began to scream in agony and terror. Wei then began applying her father's serum to the professor's raw flesh. And after that, she placed a small patch of skin onto his body. This new skin immediately began to grow and spread on its own, just like what happened to Wei's father, the scientist, at the beginning of the movie. Wei had inserted a straw into the professor's mouth at this time. But aside from the opening for the straw, the skin rapidly spread, covering everything. The encroaching skin began to constrict his airway, and the professor started to suffocate. And he died shortly thereafter. Before he died, his agonized screams he had made had been heard by the neighbors. So the neighbors called the police again. Seeing the police arriving, Wei panicked and fled the house. Because she knew she would be caught this time, the police spotted her running and gave chase. While fleeing, she ran towards the area where the homeless man usually stayed, and she begged him for help. The homeless man had always had a good impression of Wei before, because Wei had always treated him kindly. At Wei's desperate plea, the homeless man hid her in his makeshift bed, and the police couldn't find her. As Wei quickly settled into the hiding spot, the vial of serum she was carrying had suddenly shattered. Due to the spilled serum, the tissues of the homeless man and Wei's body began to horrifically merge. Their bodies started to fuse together into one grotesque form, and they both transformed into a bizarre, monstrous creature. Wei could do nothing to stop it. Now part of this monstrous being, she could only sit there, trapped. Then, she saw her aunt approaching, who had come there, desperately searching for her daughter Angie. In her current state, Wei couldn't tell her aunt what had happened to Angie, and the story ends on this tragic and horrifying note.